His rocket company is the only reason we can now send American astronauts into space. Come here. Take over, Elon. Just take over.
Hi, everyone. As you can see, I'm not just MAGA, I'm dark MAGA.
This next story could explain some things, maybe. That was just one of the many chaotic moments, performative moments of Elon Musk's time alongside Donald Trump on the campaign trail in 2024. Now, some truly shocking new reporting by the New York Times finds that while campaigning with Donald Trump last year, Elon Musk engaged in drug consumption that, quote, went well beyond occasional use, to the point where it began to have a physical impact on him. New York Times reports this, quote, as Elon Musk became one of Donald Trump's closest allies last year, leading raucous rallies and donating about $275 million to help him win the presidency, he was also using drugs far more intensely than previously known. That's according to people familiar with his activities. Musk's drug consumption went well beyond occasional use. He told people he was taking so much ketamine, a powerful anesthetic, that it was affecting his bladder, a known effect of chronic use. He took ecstasy and psychedelic mushrooms, and he traveled with a daily medication box that held about 20 pills, including ones with the markings of the stimulant Adderall. That's according to a photo of the box and people who have seen it. Musk has said that he was prescribed ketamine to treat depression, taking it approximately every 2 weeks. He told his biographer this, quote, I really don't like doing illegal drugs. However, the Times reports this, quote, Musk had been using ketamine often, sometimes daily, and mixing it with other drugs, according to people familiar with his consumption. The line between medical use and recreation was blurry, troubling some people close to him. The New York Times notes that it is unclear whether he continued to take drugs when he began working at the White House. Elon Musk's time in the administration was defined by the massive cuts he made to the federal workforce, which have frequently been challenged in courts and often blocked, as well as reported interpersonal clashes with senior cabinet members, including trade advisor Peter Navarro, who he called a, quote, moron and, quote, dumber than a sack of bricks, end quote. In the Oval Office today, Elon Musk lashed out at the New York Times without answering questions about the substance of its reporting. NBC News has not been able to independently verify the Times reporting. The White House and Elon Musk did not respond to requests for comment from NBC News. A White House spokesperson did issue a statement to the New York Times. He declined to comment on Musk's drug use. Joining our coverage is investigative reporter for the New York Times, Megan Twohey. Her byline is on that reporting we read from. Say more.
Yeah. Well, listen, you're right. There has been some coverage of Elon Musk's drug use in the past. He himself has acknowledged that he used ketamine. As he said, it was with a prescription and only every couple weeks to help with depression. But what we found is that the drug use was much more frequently than previously known. And it wasn't just the volume, it was that these drugs appeared to be mixed. So from the ketamine use that at times has been near daily and got to the point where it was causing bladder issues as he was joining Trump on the campaign trail, to the use of ecstasy and psychedelic mushrooms, as well as this pill box that contained, as many as 20 pills, including one with the marking of Adderall. So there were some people close to him. It's been really hard for reporters to penetrate the sort of circle of people who know him. But in recent months, people had started to talk to me and my colleague, Kirsten Grind, because there have been people close to him who have had concerns about his drug use.
This is going to sound like a dumb question, but what is ketamine and how do you take it? And what would a normal, either recreational or prescribed use look like? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's this powerful anesthetic that can serve as a sedative, and it has been approved by the FDA for use in medical procedures. There are doctors who have prescribed it for psychiatric treatment, like depression, but those doctors are supposed to have special licenses, and the FDA has warned that the use of this drug, can come with these serious side effects and risks, including addiction and bladder issues.
Does that mean you lose? What are the bladder issues?
The bladder issues, it's not one single bladder issue that can come from chronic use of the drug, which can be consumed in a variety of ways, including like through lozenges and nose sprays. In addition to being used medically, it has also become an increasingly popular recreational drug, I think particularly in the sort of out west in the tech world. But the FDA has warned that it can have these side effects, and the bladder issues can involve like pain and control.
My God, you don't even know what to say. I mean, what is the sense that... Obviously, the reporting is about a period in time that ended in November. He's leaving after a lot of political analysis, sort of assessing that he cost the Republicans a seat in Wisconsin. I mean, what is the sense of how much we still don't know about Elon Musk and Donald Trump?
Well, I think that that's a really good question. And obviously, our story comes at this moment when he is departing from Washington, at least to some extent. And I think that all of us are going to be processing and analyzing what has happened, both publicly but also behind the scenes over the past year. And it's also important to note that while our reporting on his drug use, this drug use that was much more intense than previously known, kind of only went up through the end of last year, and we can't say with certainty whether he was continued to use drugs once he, entered the White House and was given the keys to slash the federal bureaucracy. Listen, we asked the White House about whether or not they had drug tested Musk, and they refused to answer those questions. SpaceX, one of his companies, after he smoked weed in 2018 on Joe Rogan's podcast. That triggered, SpaceX has billions of dollars in contracts, and they are required, because of that, to maintain a drug-free workplace and test their employees. And our reporting showed that Musk receives advance warnings of those tests. So what's certain is that there doesn't seem to be there hasn't been any sort of scrutiny or true monitoring or testing of this drug use, even as it sort of bubbled up behind the scenes. And today the White House issued a statement saying that they, basically saying that they gave Musk a lot of credit for what he's done, but still refusing to answer our questions about whether or not they've drug tested him.
But importantly, did they deny anything in your story?
Nobody has denied anything in our story. And today at this press conference, the first question that Musk fielded was about our story, and he shut that down. He didn't even let the question out in its entirety. He just, he refused to engage in our reporting. He hadn't responded to our questions, so we started to submit as early as Monday. And he basically just instructed everybody to move on.
I know he has a lot of personal relationships. Are all of those relationships governed by NDAs, or is it possible to report on any of his past partners?
It is extremely hard to report on him. Like many powerful people, he has required NDAs of people in his inner circle and who have interacted with him. But we were able to ultimately interview more than 12 people, more than a dozen people who have known him and have worked for him. And so, that felt to us like it was a significant body of people, including growing numbers of people who have been close to him, who have been worried about this.
Yeah, sometimes it's not people trying to make him look bad, it's people that are most worried. What can you tell us about the box of pills and the 20 pills a day? I can barely choke down my vitamin C.
Yeah, listen, I mean, we can't go into all the details of what we've observed in that box and say things with certainty. We were able to see a photograph of this pill box, this daily pill box that contain about 20 pills.
Can you say how big it is?
Yeah, it's like about this big with divided like AM and PM.
Yeah.
And so, so we saw a photo of it, and we've talked to people who have seen it. You know, what we can say with certainty that it includes the stimulant Adderall. So, you know, we're talking about ketamine, you know, which is a sedative. We're talking about Adderall, a stimulant. We're talking about these other psychedelic drugs. And so, you know, once again, the concern has been not just the volume of drugs and the frequency, but the mixing of them.
It's unbelievable reporting. It's so nice to see you.
So nice to see you, too.
I
Thank you
hope
for
you stay
having
on the beat. If there's more to learn, Megan Twohey, thank you very much.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. You know, the more people find out about what Trump's been calling the big, beautiful bill, the less they like it. And it seems every time a Republican member of Congress meets with their own voters, they get more than an earful. And that's because all across the country, both in blue states and in red states, there are millions of voters fed up with Trump's attempts to subvert American democracy and the rule of law, as well as his wildly unpopular legislative agenda. Now, the core of the what you might call big bad bill is a scheme to gut Medicaid. The actual bill, plus Republicans refusing to renew expiring tax credits, could kick nearly 14 million people off their health insurance, according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, currently run by a Republican appointee that the Republicans have been slagging, of course. Now, all of that would pay for tax cuts for the very wealthy and big corporations. And don't forget, people inheriting estates of $20 million. Important they get one, too. Along the way, it is possible this also might trigger $500 billion in additional cuts to Medicare. Okay, all of that is very, very unpopular. People don't like it. Republicans know this and don't want to defend the bill. So most of them are either hiding from their constituents or lying to them about what the bill does, or both. And the small group of Republicans who are actually facing the people they are elected to represent, like I said, getting a real earful. We've been tracking these town halls in the House, but today it was Republican Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa's turn. She faced her constituents at a town hall she held at 7:30 in the morning.
So when we're talking about the corrections in this reconciliation bill, again, it's corrections of overpayments and people that have not been eligible for these programs by law as it is currently written. So when you are arguing about illegals that are receiving Medicaid benefits, 1.4 million, 1.4, they are not eligible, so they will be coming off. So people are not, well, we all are going to die. So for heaven's sakes, folks, okay, no, but what you don't want to do is listen to me when I say that we are going to focus on those that are most vulnerable. Those that meet the eligibility requirements for Medicaid, we will protect. We will protect them.
Just to be clear, there's like 10 million plus American citizens that are going to be kicked off Medicaid, according to the CBO's own estimates, again, run by a Republican currently. Now, I suppose the best thing that can be said about that response from Joni Ernst, we're all going to die, is that it is, I suppose, a refreshingly honest articulation of what I would say is a kind of a core Republican ethos, at least when it comes to policymaking for the poor and vulnerable. It's an ethos we have seen time and time again, particularly remember during the COVID pandemic, you saw a fair amount of Republican members at the time saying, you know, we're all going to die. As you might expect, a reception for the senator's answer has not been glowing. It immediately made headlines both locally in Iowa and across the nation. Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts tagged Ernst's words as the Republicans' new pitch for their bill, while Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota quipped, quote, "I thought my job as senator was to try to keep my constituents alive." Having said all that, this is a 1,000-page bill. There's a lot more wildly destructive stuff that's hiding in there that's flying under the radar. We're going to cover some of it as this goes on. One example is a very, very small but dangerous provision that is meant to aid Donald Trump's assault on the federal judiciary, the only one of the three branches of government providing any semblance of oversight to his reckless and often illegal agenda. Now, the provision that the House Republicans put in the bill could allow him to skirt federal contempt orders, things that his Department of Justice has been flirting with basically day in, day out. This week, voters tried to make Republican Congressman Mike Flood of Nebraska answer for that.
I do not agree with that section that was added to that bill. This provision was unknown to me when I voted for the bill.
This morning, Senator Ernst was also made to answer for it.
As I'm sure you're aware, but apparently many of the representatives were not aware at the time, nestled within the 1,000 pages of this bill was a small clause which, for the first time in our nation's history, in fact, effectively prohibits the federal courts from enforcing contempt orders. So, ma'am, my question for you today is, will you pledge to us, our constituents who you serve, that you will not vote for this bill or any other bill that contains this poisonous provision?
Okay, and thank you for clarifying. So one thing that I will explain, because we have a lot of subject matter experts here in the room, is that the House has written one version of a bill. The Senate is taking up our own version of the bill. The two will be married together at some point. There is a rule called the Byrd Rule. Silence. So the Byrd Rule states that anything that goes into our package in the Senate, it can't be policy. It can't be policy. It has to be focused on mandatory spending. I don't know anything about that provision that talks about mandatory spending or revenues.
Now, I just got to say something real quick in that I think a little condescending lecture to our own constituents. The Byrd Rule is enforced by the Senate parliamentarian who the Senate Republican majority just completely overrode last week to take out California's electric car vehicle regulations. There's no reason to think they're going to listen to the parliamentarian this time. And you may have noticed the senator's answer was about process rather than the actual substance of the provision. There's been this debate, I think, in our political discourse, and I myself go back and forth, about basically how much democracy is some abstract principle in the U.S. constitutional order that people are like, yeah, or is it something that everyday real people actually care about and can rally behind? And here's the thing I want to leave you with. There are people who got up this morning at the crack of dawn in red Iowa, state with Republican representation, went for Trump, to go talk to their senator, doing everything they can as informed citizens because they do believe in this country's constitutional order, and they are trying to protect it. And I think there are more of them than Republicans are betting on.
2 weeks from tomorrow, Donald Trump will finally get the military parade he's been pretty much begging for. Ever the fanboy for the pomp and the glitz of a big show, whatever it looks like, Trump first became enamored with the idea in 2017 after seeing France's military parade on Bastille Day. And even months after attending, he just couldn't get it out of his head.
It was one of the greatest parades I've ever seen. It was 2 hours on the button, and it was military might. Because of what I witnessed, we may do something like that on July 4th in Washington, down Pennsylvania. I don't know. We're going to have to try and top it. But we had a lot of planes going over, and we had a lot of military might.
Now, Trump never got the military parade he envisioned during his first term, though after multiple delays, Trump did manage in 2019 to put on a July 4th salute to America, but it lacked that something special he really, really wanted, like tanks rolling down the streets of Washington, D.C. And all that was due to several factors, like big concerns over costs, the fact that the tanks weighing nearly 60 tons each would rip up D.C. roads, and the Pentagon's real alarm, understandably, over the optics. I mean, Trump's first Secretary of Defense, four-star General Jim Mattis, reportedly said that he would, quote, rather swallow acid than watch the military parade that Trump wanted. It's quite a memorable quote. And the vice chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff reportedly told colleagues at the Pentagon that the parade that Trump wanted was what dictators do. Well, that was then, and this is now. And now Donald Trump has an administration full of yes men and yes women, including a former weekend cable host running the Pentagon. And so Donald Trump will finally get the parade he's always dreamed of. Now, to be clear, plans have been in the works for a while now to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army. But at some point this year, those plans changed to include the massive parade in D.C. on June 14th, which also happens to be Trump's 79th birthday. Go figure. Now, preparations for that event are already underway, and it will reportedly include about 130 vehicles, including tanks, armored fighting vehicles, trucks towing artillery launchers, 50 helicopters, and 9,000 troops. Those troops will be housed in government buildings and will be sleeping on cots and in their own sleeping bags. According to NBC News, they will also be expected to dine on ready-to-eat rations during their stay here for this parade. I imagine those accommodations have something to do with cost cutting. This is, of course, the administration that likes to brag about its focus on cutting wasteful spending. And yet the whole thing is still expected to cost as much as $45 million. A figure, by the way, that doesn't include paying to fix damaged roads, cleanup, security. But that's actually not the only cost of Donald Trump's strongman vanity parade. See, for more than 3 decades, veterans of the Vietnam War and their families have held an annual ceremony at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., to honor those who served and died. And this year, for the first time, that ceremony is being forced to move out of D.C. to make room for Trump's military parade. This year, the ceremony for Vietnam War vets will be held a few miles away in Virginia and feature a 3/4 scale reproduction of the iconic Wall Memorial. And while many who plan to attend still feel the gesture from the organizers of the ceremony is genuine, and it certainly is, some also feel like it won't be the same. One veteran speaking with Stars and Stripes said, quote, "Visiting the wall at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial is sacred. This is like putting up a model of the Statue of Liberty." A wife of a veteran told the Washington Post, I feel anger. I don't feel anger. I think I'm just really sad, but I'm still going to honor my husband. And another veteran's wife said, "I respect the 250th anniversary of the Army. That is not a small deal. But our heroes are being shoved aside. This is no way to honor the Army or our country." Amen to that.
I want to bring in New York Times political reporter Maggie Astor. Kevin Madden was a presidential campaign advisor for Mitt Romney. And here in studio with me, Dr. Irwin Redlener, co-founder of the Children's Health Fund, senior research scholar at Columbia University, and clinical professor of pediatrics at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. Welcome to all of you. Maggie, tell us more about this report and the so-called evidence that it's based on.
So this report is was presented as a comprehensive look at children's health and the causes of chronic health conditions among children. And what we found yesterday, I should also say that it was the news organization Notice that originally broke this story, so they should get credit for breaking that story. So what we found yesterday was that a number of the citations in this report either were riddled with errors. For example, they listed the wrong author or the wrong title or some such. And some of them were just fabricated altogether. They didn't exist. They had the title of a paper, they listed a journal name, they listed a date, they listed an author, and no such paper existed. So the presence of these fabricated citations in the report obviously raises questions, according to the experts that we talked to, about the credibility of the report's findings. And certainly the researchers whose names were cited in the report attached to papers that they didn't write are very concerned about their names and reputations being used that way, and what it says about the underlying validity of the citations in the report.
So just to be clear, in short, there are entire papers that are cited that never existed. They certainly didn't exist in the journal they said, on the date they said, in the way they said. In addition to that, names of real people, maybe serious people, were used for things that they didn't do. Is that basically the bottom line here?
That's correct. We spoke, and Notice spoke as well, to a number of researchers whose names were listed in the bibliography of this report, saying, I'll give an example from our article, Catherine Keyes, a professor of epidemiology at Columbia. She was listed as the author of a paper about mental health and substance use among adolescents. And that paper that was cited in the report didn't exist. She spoke to my colleague, Danny Bloom, who is my co-author on this article, and said she did not write any paper by the title that the report cited, and nor does a paper by that title seem to exist by any author. And that's just one example. There are others.
It's such good reporting and important reporting. So, doctor, you've been working in healthcare, what, 50 years? You have an international reputation in children's health. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says these issues with the report, things like formatting, shouldn't invalidate the findings themselves. What did you say? What do you say?
Well, first of all, Chris, let's move away from the technical issues of actually a misinformed, lying document that was put out by the Secretary of HHS. And yeah, they lied about it, they fabricated citations, but at the end of the day, R.F. Kennedy Jr. is using this fabricated information to create policies and recommendations that affect the health of children. Millions and millions of lives will be affected by the nonsense that they put out in that report. It's really unconscionable. It's just really, it's hard to believe. And I do think that people need to focus on what this means. And what it means to me is a reinforcement of what we felt from the beginning when RFK Jr. was originally suggested as a potential nominee for Secretary of HHS. He's unqualified, he's unscientific, and he's promoting crazy ideas that are bad for America's children. And don't forget, he has the biggest public health platform and megaphone of any human being on the planet, Chris. And this is what we have to deal with now. You know, if he was working as an academic researcher at any kind of medical school, for example, and put this out, he would have been fired. And I think the senators who approved this confirmation and the medical organizations that remain silent need to now call for his resignation. He cannot remain in that office using misstated data and really dishonest data to drive critical public health policy that will affect children.
I want to give you a chance to punctuate that because most people don't know the way that this works. You're a doctor in a pediatric office. You have hundreds of patients. To what extent are you relying on this kind of publication and the information that it cites to help guide and update your understanding as a physician of how you should treat and make recommendations to children's families?
Well, of course. And first of all, you know, take the issue of childhood vaccinations, childhood immunizations, which have been proven to be safe, effective, saving lives for decades of children who otherwise in the past would have been dying from diseases like measles and polio and so on. And here we have the head of Health and Human Services saying, well, we're not so sure. We need more information. So that means
don't come to me for medical advice.
I know we're sitting in our office, and here's a parent saying, well, doctor, should we get our kid vaccinated? And I'm saying, yeah, you should, but what about this report that I just read from the Secretary of HHS? We have to say, no, that was absolutely incorrect. But people are already skeptical about medical information, and this is just exacerbating a terrible situation for practicing pediatricians and, frankly, for families too, Chris.
So, Kevin, you are an expert in communications. The White House defended the report, downplayed these citation issues, and said future questions should go to HHS, which, at least as earlier today, did not respond in any thorough way. Are untruths so baked in that for the voting public it doesn't matter? Or how do you view this?
Yeah, well, I think anytime the White House defers to an agency or a cabinet office. That means they really want no part of it. And I think they do recognize this. The scrutiny here is pretty real. I mean, look, first of all, this was not a report that was in any way routine. Secretary Kennedy and others in the Maha sort of supportive movement that he's put together have been anticipating this and hyping it for a pretty long time. So the fact that there were these mistakes and these citation issues that undermined it, that's a very big, I think, internal problem that they're going to have. The other part of it is they've always based their advocacy on what they said was evidence-based advocacy. So when the evidence then becomes under this level of scrutiny that they had to expect, given that they were hyping it, I think it really does demonstrate that it's an unforced error. The one thing I think Carolyn Levitt's doing as a communicator here is she believes that the Maha movement, that is very supportive of Secretary Kennedy, very supportive of the president, is a grassroots movement that is not necessarily going to defer to scientific journal recommendations, but instead they firmly believe that these issues, that somebody's finally speaking about chronic illnesses in a different way than many of the academics or establishment had. And she's trying to speak directly to them. But if you're going to win that debate, you still have to win the larger, big middle of the American public. And they do believe in having conversations and debates that are rooted in some sort of scientific authority.
Tonight, Donald Trump took to social media at 8:09 a.m. to publicly lash out against China after a roller coaster few days for Trump's illegal tariffs that were first blocked. Then they were confirmed blocked by a federal court. Then they were temporarily reinstated. Donald Trump accused China of violating a trade truce that he claims the two countries agreed to earlier this month. He posted, quote, "I made a fast deal with China in order to save them from what I thought was going to be a very bad situation. And I didn't want to see that happen because of this deal, everything quickly stabilized and China got back to business as usual. China, perhaps not surprisingly to some, this part's in all caps, has totally violated its agreement with us. So much for being Mr. Nice Guy." Donald Trump didn't specify how China violated the agreement with the United States, but it didn't stop him from repeating that allegation.
Are you going to reinstate the tariffs on China? You said that they violated the agreement with the U.S.
Well, they did. They violated a big part of the agreement we made. If you read that whole statement, I was very nice to them. I helped them because they were in trouble with the stoppage of a massive amount of business. But I'm sure that I'll speak to President Xi and hopefully we'll work that out. But yeah, there's a violation of the agreement.
Never any specifics. Today, Bloomberg News reported that the Trump administration is planning to extend sanctions on China's tech sector. Donald Trump's antagonistic approach to trade with China has J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon sounding the alarm. At an economic forum this morning, he said this.
We have problems, and we got to deal with them. And then the biggest one, underlying both that, is the enemy within. I'm not as worried about China. China is a potential adversary. They're doing a lot of things well. They have a lot of problems. What I really worry about is us. Can we get our own act together, our own values, our own capability, our own management?
Now, that's the important point here. It's not that there aren't things to deal with China, but we seem to have more things to deal with here at home. According to the U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer, Donald Trump's latest outburst seems to stem from China's reluctance to lift restrictions on rare earth metals.
The Chinese are slow rolling their compliance, which is completely unacceptable and has to be addressed. We haven't seen the flow of some of those critical minerals as they were supposed to be doing.
Now, these rare earths, U.S. automakers, for instance, rely heavily on those metals, yet Donald Trump seems determined to continue to sell this fantasy that's actually disconnected from our manufacturing and economic reality.
All of the manufacturers will build their parts here, too. I mean, it used to bother me. They make a part in Canada, a part in Mexico, a part in Europe, and sent all over the place, and nobody knew what the hell was happening. I think it's ridiculous. You build a car, make it in America, and I gave them a little leeway on that, gave them some leeway, but over the next year, they've got to have the whole thing built in America. That's what we want.
A part in Canada, a part in Mexico, a part in Europe, and nobody knows what the hell is happening. Car production and sales span continents. The engine might be designed in Germany. The lithium battery components might come from Canada. The parts might be assembled in Mexico. And yes, they might all come together in Michigan or Ohio or Kentucky. quote, they've got to have the whole thing built in America, end quote, does not reflect anything about either the automobile industry or, for that matter, the entire global economy in 2025. It does not reflect the reality in this country either. The factories to make all the parts to make a car don't exist in America. It would take years to create them, and in many cases, the materials those non-existent factories would need to make the parts that also don't exist in America. Donald Trump's trade rhetoric is not only outdated, it's divorced from reality, and his reaction to it is tariffs. His reaction to everything to do with trade is tariffs. 2 federal courts have now said the tariffs are illegal and unconstitutional. In fact, Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution speaks to this very issue. It's crystal clear. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. Now, that's some antiquated language, but it means tariffs. The Congress levies tariffs, not the president, except for a few exceptions where Congress very specifically delegated tariff power to the president. But if Congress doesn't give it to you, you don't have it. And again, according to federal courts, that does not include these Trump tariffs. Even conservative outlets are making the argument that the Trump tariffs are illegal and unconstitutional. The Wall Street Journal editorial board says President Trump isn't a tariff king. The National Review editorial board says the tariff power properly belongs with Congress. Today, The Atlantic's Ilya Somin writes that Wednesday's ruling from the United States Court of International Trade against Donald Trump's tariffs was, quote, a victory for separation of powers, end quote. She continues, quote, the court ruled that Trump does not have the unbounded authority he claims to impose unlimited tariffs on goods from nearly every country. The British overthrew King Charles I in part because he tried to impose ship money taxes without legislative authorization. The President of the United States is no king, and he does not have the power to impose taxes in the form of tariffs wherever he feels like it. The court's decision upholds this fundamental principle of the Anglo-American constitutional tradition, end quote. Yesterday, Donald Trump's National Economic Council chair called the ruling a, quote, hiccup. In a month or two, you're going to look ahead and see that countries have opened their markets to American products. They've lowered their non-tariff barriers. They've lowered their tariffs. And all the countries that have done that are being treated very respectfully and very well by the United States, end quote. It's Kevin Hassett. The Trump White House has also responded to these rulings against his tariffs by, yet again, attacking the judges who ruled against Donald Trump, which, of course, include a judge that Trump himself appointed. Adam Serwer wrote about this Trump legal strategy earlier this month for The Atlantic in an article entitled, Trump is tired of courts telling him that he's breaking the law. Quote, Chief Justice John Roberts warned in an appearance at Georgetown Law School that the rule of law is endangered. One reason for that is Roberts' own opinion that the president is nearly immune to criminal prosecution for lawbreaking, a finding that has emboldened Trump to ignore the law. Immunity is apparently insufficient, however. Trump also wants the ability to violate the Constitution at will without meaningful resistance from the courts, end quote. I'd only disagree with Adam Serwer in that he wants the ability to ignore the Constitution without any disagreement from the court. In the Oval Office today, Donald Trump defended his tariffs yet again.
Without the tariffs, our nation would be imperiled. We would really be imperiled.
Again, lacking in detail. What is he talking about? The peril is a president who thinks he's the king and that the Constitution doesn't matter. That's the peril, not the tariffs. And no matter what he says, when Donald Trump launches a trade war, we pay for it. When Donald Trump attacks the rule of law, we pay for it. When Donald Trump's tariffs are ruled illegal, he creates more uncertainty and the global economy pays for it and we pay for it. That's not leadership. That is simply chaos.
House Speaker Mike Johnson is responding after, as we said, Elon Musk expressed his disappointment in the sweeping domestic policy bill passed by House Republicans last week. Here's more of what Musk told CBS News, followed by Speaker Johnson's new comments.
So, I was disappointed to see the massive spending bill, frankly. Which increases the budget deficit, not just decrease it, and undermines the work that the DOGE team is doing.
I actually thought that when this big, beautiful bill came along. I mean, everything he's done on DOGE gets wiped out in the first year.
I think a bill can be big or it can be beautiful, but I don't know if it can be both. My personal opinion.
I sent my good friend Elon a long text message last night explaining that it can be both big and beautiful, okay? So what I wanted to make sure that he understands is that the projection that he's referring to and others is from the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office. They are historically totally unreliable. It's run by Democrats. 84% of the number crunchers over there are donors to big Democrats. They don't have our best interest in mind, and they've always been off.
Okay, let me just say this. Mike Johnson has been there while the deficit has exploded at record rates. These Republicans, Jonathan Lemire, and I'll bring Mike in, I'll bring Jim in as well, because Jim was around when he saw us fight day in and day out, and it was ugly, but he saw us fight day in and day out. We balanced the budget 4 years in a row. And let me tell you, as Lisa Simpson once said of Bart praying before an exam, prayer is the last refuge of the truly desperate. I disagree with that, of course, but attacking the CBO is always the last refuge of the big spending Republican. They all do it because they don't like facing the truth. And the truth is that under Republicans from 2017 to 2021, the budgets were bigger than they had ever been. The deficit's bigger than they had ever been. The debt bigger than they'd ever been. And here, we're not talking about rounding errors, Jonathan Lemire. We are talking about $20 trillion that these Republicans are going to vote on to add to the federal debt. $20 trillion. We can't afford it. There's nothing ideological about this. There's nothing ideological about those numbers. There's nothing ideological about not balancing the budget. I know. I was there. We did it 4 years in a row. The only time that's happened in the past century. And they're adding $20 trillion to the debt with this bill, John Lemire, and he's blaming the Congressional Budget Office. I mean, that's not even shooting the messenger. That's even worse than that. He can't believe that. He knows that this bill cripples America's economy over the next decade.
Yeah, there are few things more true than the observation that Republicans only care about deficits and debts when they're out of power. And we are seeing it here. We saw it in the first Trump term. We're seeing it again now, this absolute explosion in spending. And in this bill, a priority on tax cuts for the wealthy over taking steps that would even make a dent into these things that have worried you, I know, Joe, for so long. And it is disingenuous. And you're right. The CBO is a nonpartisan organization. And do Republicans and Democrats alike grumble at it at times? Of course. But Jim VandeHei, the bad faith attacks here from Speaker Johnson have taken this to sort of a new level to try to write these off as deep state bureaucrats, as opposed to people who are simply doing the job, people who are simply focusing on the math when he doesn't want to.
Yeah, I mean, the viewers should know you're being duped. You've been duped by both parties for 20 years. Everyone comes in and says they care about deficits, they care about the financial stability of the country, and then they spend money. And they spend a hell of a lot more than they say that they're going to spend. We're talking about so much debt now, and why it should matter to you at home is, listen, when we have huge amounts of debt, you end up spending more on the interest on that debt than you do on our national defense. That means less money for education, health care, programs for the poor, safer neighborhoods. And at some point, you become so unstable as a capitalistic democracy that the bond markets and other people start to see us as a riskier asset, which is what you see kind of happening in the atmosphere right now. At some point, we're going to pay the piper, right? But so far, Democrats, Republicans, all they do is spend money because they think it makes you feel better and like them more. They don't want to take it away. That's one of the reasons, I would fault Elon's approach, but the spirit of trying to reduce the size of the federal government, like we do need that mentality. I don't think you do it haphazardly. I don't think you do it cruelly, but someone has to come in and get the place in order. And as Joe said, it's not since Clinton and that Republican Congress back in the 90s that people took this seriously. And it shows that it could be done, right? It shows that it is possible that you can run a flourishing economy, a really powerful country, a massive national defense system, and still spend the amount of money that we're taking in, which is, by the way, what everyone expects all of us to do at home.
And you know, for people that say it can't be done, I know it's I know the numbers are terrible right now. It may take a decade to get it done.
Right.
But government needs to move towards a balanced budget, not toward $20 trillion more in debt. And I will say, when I first was running, everybody mocked and ridiculed those of us who said we could balance the budget. They said it was the unbalanceable budget. I could show you clippings that said it was impossible to do. We did it. We did it 4 years in a row. And then guess what? Guess what? Republicans got back into the White House in 2001, and suddenly Republicans stopped caring about the deficits. The only time Republicans care about the deficits are when Democrats are in the office, in the White House. That's got to change, or we're in big trouble.
All right.